Hello, and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. This is a game of Frontline, and we're playing Jing versus vanilla Nomads. This is the vanilla Jing list that I took for the scenario on screen now, and this is kind of what I would call my go-to Jing. List will change from time to scenario to scenario, but this is kind of the core of what I like about vanilla Jing, although it's also worth noting that this list has somewhat fallen into kind of a first-order optimal trap. There's very few pieces that can be easily removed in order to make space for other things, and there's not a lot of subtlety to it. Regardless, I do really enjoy it, and it exemplifies a lot of the things that I enjoy about Jing. So, we start with It's Jing, the Guangxi and Celestial Guard monitor package, and the Dao Ying Lieutenant with +1 order. I've gone for the cheaper Dao Ying because it's cheaper. I don't have 8 points spare to make it a hacker, although it's entirely viable to do so. Mostly I find that Dao Ying sits in the deployment zone and I don't have any repeaters, so the cost to upgrade it to a hacker wouldn't really be justified. We have the ubiquitous Libertos, a couple of Shaolin monks, and a heavy shotgun Longya. I have been finding the heavy shotgun Longya to be a massive outperformer, to the extent that I am almost considering cutting the Dao Ying, perhaps say making the Yan Ho the Lieutenant, in order to fit a second Longya. The Longya shotgun has been kind of like a junior Sujan in just about every game that I've played it in. Not this one, it would be just an ARO piece in this game, but when it goes off, it really goes off. So that's been a piece that has thoroughly displaced the mine layer submachine gun profile, and which I've really enjoyed playing. We also have a Zhanshi Yisheng Doctor with Yao Zhao, and she is almost entirely a pocket doctor for the Yanhuo. Now, the Yanhuo is a piece that not every Jing player will like, but I really enjoy. It packs just about everything that I want for a tag. It's a better active shooter than many tags are, frankly, with the HRMC and Ballistic Skill 14 at functionally a low cost. There is no firepower piece in the game that comes close to the firepower it has for the cost that it has. Now, you trade a little bit on that. You give up some resilience compared to a tag, and you don't attack awareness, etc. But it's a very pure piece. It does, however, sometimes need support. I find that every time I don't take a doctor, I wish I had one, and every time I do take a doctor, I wish it was something else. But generally speaking, better be safe than sorry. We also have the Sujan and Moang duo, which I discussed briefly / at length in my duos tier list video. This is actually not something that I would put in every single list. I like it, I think it's very strong, it trades heavily on the Dao Ying, but it is not by any means an obligatory selection in the list. I have actually been finding that you can cut the Sujan even sometimes. I mentioned that the Longya shotgun was performing kind of like a junior Sujan role, and in fact it can penetrate some defenses that a Sujan can't. But these are very strong pieces. I had the points in this list to upgrade the Moang to be a Spitfire with Flamen Spear, which would actually matter quite a bit. And then finally we have Bixia. Bixia is the newest addition to vanilla Jing, and I absolutely love her. This is not a game where she would perform particularly much. She mostly just sat in the deployment zone, ran around on turn 3. But she does some things that are just really fantastic. Firstly, she's a joy to play. The mobility of her profile is out of this world, and it's really enjoyable to use pieces like that. The fact that she can reliably move 10 inches in a turn, she has all sorts of mobility with Super Jump and Climbing Plus, which combine together kind of nicely. She's a stealth profile with good close combat, which again is something that actually you would think would be more common in Jing, but she's really the only one in this list apart from the Shaolin monks. And she's a specialist, and that last bit is super nice. The fact that I can have a specialist in the list that is also doing all of the cool heavy infantry stuff I want Jing to do kind of lessens the load on the rest of the list, and it lets me fit more pieces like the Sujan, the Moang, the Yanho, who are all good, but not specialists. Finally, she's a very serviceable gunfighter, and all of that put together kind of makes her play something like an Umbra Samaritan, which is a piece that I've really enjoyed. Obviously, no Protheon, but she outperforms in a number of other ways that are really significant. So, very much enjoying her. She is too expensive to be an auto-include, but she is in a lot of my lists. This is the Nomad list that I played against, and it is fairly short range, actually. But firstly, can we just have a moment to credit the list name? This is my regular opponent, Aaron. He came up with this, and the list deserves props for the name alone. That said, obviously we have a very heavy hacking presence here by combining all 3 of those elite hackers. The Puppet Bot's obviously very strong, the Vostok very strong, but something that you will note about this list is that really the only long-range piece is Nauf, and Nauf doesn't have a doctor behind them. Now, That's fine. Nauf is very hard to doctor thanks to the lack of a cube. But the list, it has what I would call probably just enough long-range firepower. If it can close, if it can deal damage, if it can use attacking, it is very, very strong. And in many other respects, this is kind of just like an all-star list of Nomad stuff. With the, you've got Engineer, you've got an Evo Hacker, you've got the Vostok, you've got the Chimera, etc. Even the Libertos makes a showing. The only thing it doesn't have that I would like, apart from one bigger, longer range gun that isn't susceptible to failure, like Nauf, which how do you fit that? The only way you fit that is by cutting many things, is actually some Morlocks. I would love Morlocks in this list. It really only has very limited sources of smoke, and the Chimera, for example, she's Fizz 13, that's fine, but she's a very expensive piece to be a smoke piece to get things like your puppets into assault range. So this is a list, frankly, this is a list that is very strong, but this game would kind of showcase some of the weaknesses that a Nomad list like this, that loads up on tech and hacking and etc., can have when they come into contact with just a very direct list that happens to win some face-to-face rolls. So this is the table that we played on. You won't have seen this before. This table, this was the first time I'd ever played on it. This is Aaron's table. He had brought it around to my place to play. And literally all of this work, I had never seen the table work in progress. This was my first time seeing it, and it is fucking incredible. Also a joy to play on, really enjoyed this. If you're interested in how we played certain things, basically if it looks like it's a ladder, it's a ladder. There's a huge amount of vaultability, there's a lot of movement, vertical and horizontal around the table. Just really, really enjoyable. As I mentioned, we're playing Frontline, and I've drawn as my classifieds follow-up, that's Heavy Infantry, the HVT, Forward Observe, the HVT, Extreme Prejudice, and Net Undermine. So just as a bit of a note, I'm glad I have Bishia in this list because she can do just about all of those. That's one of the strengths that she has, and she would end up doing a couple. Whip 13 versus Whip 14 Lieutenant, but I lose the roll. Aaron snap pick selecting to go first, and so I deploy on this side. Now, there was a very significant decision I'm going to break down that was made during deployment, but first just let's go through some of what we can see here. So huddled behind this building are the puppets, with the Uberfall Commando kind of spread out around here. The Vostok and Zoe are on this rooftop. Mary is on this bridge here. Jazz is hanging out way back there, and then Nauf is knocked down here and prone. Otherwise, there are just some repeaters hanging around, and probably most notably, Pywell is hanging out down here behind this building. Now, a couple of significant things about my deployment. Firstly, I kind of knew where I would expect attacks to come from. Because we've got these decompression zones here, here, and here, it is really not easy to push pieces up through these lines. There is a path of attack along the gantries on the boat that I had to be wary of, but they could be kind of watched from high ground. Any attack that wanted to use the shadows provided by the buildings would need to come along these paths and funnel through this area here, or otherwise contest with the decompression zones. The other really, really notable thing about Aaron's deployment is that I could do an SWC count, and I determined that he had 5 SWC visible on the table. That's a very significant number because it means that there cannot be a 1.5 SWC support weapon coming down as his reserve drop. There cannot be a tag, there cannot be a Kriza Borak, there cannot be any other kind of a sniper or anything like that. I know that I have seen every gun that's going to have long range. And so those two things inform my deployment. So firstly, defending against the puppets, etc. We've got the Libertos and its mine hanging out here. The Libertos is on the bridge. That will stage it for an attack later in the game. The mine is at ground level. The Longya is here with Panzerfaust lines kind of into this space there and a shotgun line into that space there. I'm hoping the Longya will survive. It won't, but if it was well positioned to attack. We have a whole bunch of Quangxi just hanging out kind of in spaces where they can shotgun chain rifle things that come around corners. Although to note, I don't want to have to use Quangxi as defensive elements in this game, because if I'm being attacked, it will probably be by pupniks and puppets, and both of those things trade efficiently, either because of their wounds or just eminent disposability, into Quangxi. Bishia herself is hanging out back here, hoping to be safe. And then the other sort of big decision, right, so I've got basically what I've got in this space here is a whole lot of disposable elements, mines, there's a Shaolin monk, basically chaff, stuff that I don't care too much if it dies. The Dao Ying is hanging out way back here. I've done a count, and I'm pretty sure they can't be a drop troop, but just in case, it is watching my back table edge, but otherwise it is in the safest possible position I can find for it. But then we have the remainder of our heavy infantry basically standing up on somewhat hard ARO duty. Now, importantly, all of them are avoiding now. Every single one of them has significant elements that would stop now from getting into line of fire without spending a whole lot of orders. But what I do have is really long cross-map angles. So the Yan Huo is deployed standing here, and the Moang is deployed standing here, and the Suzhou is deployed standing here. So the Suzhou's Panzerfaust, you can see all the way down there, and all the way up there. The Yan Huo has some massive lines as well. They are mostly diagonal, but I can just about see down into this space here. A prone model would be fine, but it's able to see a standing model. And then the Moang, remember I spent the extra points to give it a Flyman Spear. It can see the Vostok if it stands up. And the Vostok is inside splash range of Zoe. Now, I would probably miss that shot. It's got mimetism, right? I'm not likely to hit. But if I do, the damage would be critical. So that pins the Vostok down as well. Now, as it turns out, my opponent's reserve is a Libertos, which comes down here. And actually, I think my reserve may have been the Libertos as well, but it's sort of all kind of much of a muchness. The big decision that was made was being able to deploy those two big guns in those positions, and that ended up being massive. Just a quick shot here of its deployment zone. We can see Zoe, the Vostok, and Mary. Now, you can sort of see if you look at it from this angle, it would have benefited Zoe to have been around here. She would have been visible from along this bridge, but there's a big sort of, this building here would have blocked off line of fire from anything else. She would have been reasonably safe in that position, a change to make in future. You can see my opponent's Nauf here, just really lovely model. I actually really like this. This is a 3D print of, I think, Nova or Sarah Kerrigan, looks super awesome. And then here is a shot, just you can sort of see a little bit better some of the lines that the big guns have. So there's still plenty of terrain that is blocking like proper dominance of the table, but there's just some line of fire down to here, enough to make it difficult, and the high ground is is under sort of pretty solid surveillance. Also visible in this picture, we've got my Pocket Doctor and Helper Bot for the Yan Huo. The Doctor is here, and the Helper Bot is next to the Yan Huo because the Doctor would be able to vault onto this and onto that if she ever needed to go and help the Moang out, although I don't expect to. If the Moang is in no wounding cap, something very weird has happened, it's probably going to drop into total cover as soon as it fires its Planet Spears. So the game begins, I spend a command token to strip one order. There's counterintelligence on Puppet Master, but it's still worth doing that. And kind of as expected, the cheap disposable irregular elements will rush forward. But critically, the defenses that I've put in place all do their respective jobs, and I have what is probably ultimately a really good reactive turn. I don't think I actually kill anything other than a Libertos, which we'll get to, but what happens first is that the Uberfall Commando and the Pupniks make a run up in this direction. Now, they're moving first because they'll throw down some smoke that will let them clear past the Moang and the Yan Huo. And the Pupniks obviously are really good at dodging and clearing out this mine that the Libertos has laid. But the actual attack, the most dangerous attack my opponent can make is with the Puppets. He doesn't really want to spend the Uberfall in first. The Uberfall is not great for example, clearing past the Longya. And there's no, what she wants to do, ideally, she wants to gang up on and destroy super high value pieces. And it's a long run through a lot of Overwatch for her to get to her preferred targets of choice. What my opponent wants to do is clear out the mine and then attack with the Puppets, because the Puppets can very effectively clean up all of the, the Guangxi, the Shaolin, etc., and bleed down my order pool and my resources that way without giving up much other than Puppets themselves. But I am super happy that it's the Uberfall that is moving, because it takes her, in order to throw the smoke, and then in order to move forward, and then in order to move and dodge, and then in order to pull back into cover. That's 4 orders out of an order pool of 9, which massively limits how much those Puppets can do. Frankly, he should probably have just run the Puppets forward first, had them eat the mine, just wear it. But what it means is that when Puppets come to activate, they get up and around into this space, and the marksmanship Puppet does discover and then unfortunately kill my Longya. Rip Longya, I had great plans for you. But that's it. That's all that they do. They don't even get into the Guangxi. And so while losing the Longya sucks, a whole bunch of my opponent's resources have just moved into the midfield where I can attack them next turn, and they've stopped there. They've killed kind of an acceptable amount. On my right flank, the damage is actually not even particularly worse, but a Libertos does Libertos things. So that Libertos that had reserve dropped basically runs up and around here, engages the Guangxi and the Shaolin, kills the Guangxi, knocks the Shaolin unconscious before it's finally brought down by the Yanhuo. So in ARO in total, I've lost 3 things, about 32 points, which is 10% of my army. That's tolerable. That's genuinely tolerable. They were all ablative pieces. Particularly losing 1 Guangxi and 1 Shaolin is totally serviceable in exchange for a Libertos. So broadly, I would say a very successful ARO turn, and my counterattack is really solid as well. So quite a few overlapping activations happen on my counterattack, but the critical elements that move forward are the Moang and Sujan duo, the Yanhuo providing fire support, and the Libertos. Now, one Guangxi, it's got a chain rifle. It makes an impetuous order since it can see a few things here, but it gets shot down for no benefit. That sucks, but fair enough. It's possible that I should not have charged it into a shock AP marksman rifle. I was hoping it would miss since it would not see me until I was within an 8, so it would have needed a 9, but is what it is. However, so these 2 heavy pieces stomp forward first, and I'm using the NCO orders to move the Moang forward and take shots. It brings its Spitfire to bear on the puppets, actually has them out of cover, takes quite a few orders because they fight back and are very tough, but it eventually puts both of them down, and as it's done so, it's moved the Sujan all the way up and around to here. The Sujan then rounds the corner and kills the Uberfell commando, and then the Libertos begins its attack. Now, I would like to have pushed even further forward with this duo. They're sort of sitting kind of in this space here right now, but the deployment zone repeaters that my opponent has are thick, and the hacking arrows will just shut me down. The Moang has stealth. It could feasibly get through, but we've got, if we remember, we've got Pywell here, the Vostok here, the actual hackers themselves are all over the place, and Billy is here. He's actually moved forward slightly into cover at my opponent's turn. This is basically a massive repeater network. I cannot punch into the deployment zone, so the Sujan is like, it has to stall. The Sujan kind of has to stop where it is. It's taken 1 kill and we'll have to leave it at that for the moment. I just realistically can't push into that with a hackable piece. However, the Libertos can make an attack. So it comes up and around here to see Mary. And at this point, basically a song and dance begins. Mary has to dodge away from it. There's shotgun templates going down. What eventually ends up happening is that Libertos sort of like pushes Mary out into this open space, at which point the Yanhuo opens up. Now that's bad range and she's in cover, so it's 0 range because a HRMC doesn't have a bad range beyond 32 to 38. 32 to 40, sorry. But it's still a stiff penalty. But it turns out that if you just fire 20 dice at something over a course of 4 orders, you'll kill it. It takes about 4 shots, 4 rounds of shooting to put Mary down, but it does. Guns her down, and then the Libertos, basically with one last go, has a shotgun shot that downs the Vostok, and it's stalled there. It can't go anywhere else. But that's a very good outcome, basically. With Mary down, with the Vostok unconscious, with the puppets and the Uberfall down, this is a pretty good position. Now, it's taken all of my orders, which means that the Moang and the Sujan are now kind of stranded in the midfield. I have exactly 1 order to sort of pull them back into the best position that I can. So the Sujan ends up here and the Moang ends up on this bridge. But that is a pretty solid counterattack. It cost me 1 Guangxi, which really only died because I chose to impetuous with it. I think the decision was worthwhile, but I'm not sure. And the Libertos is now stranded in the open, surrounded by my opponent's stuff. But it's a Libertos. It's done its job. So here we can see how that looks on the table. We've got the Moang and the Sujan. The Libertos is kind of not quite visible, but is hanging out here. And my opponent is sort of preparing his own counterstroke. So the first thing that happens is that a Jaguar, who is hanging out down behind this building, pops up and trades with the Libertos. It takes a couple of goes. Basically, they're just shooting backwards and forwards, and eventually effectively both of them die. That means the Libertos' total kill count is an assist on Mary, downs the Vostok, downs a Jaguar, although the Vostok now will immediately stand back up as Zoe fixes it up. That completes test run for my opponent, but the Vostok's kind of not going anywhere. And in fact, I think it will end the turn unconscious in a face-to-face roll as it tries to get back down. It will play no further part in the battle, but a classified has been done. The next move by my opponent is for Nauf to finally activate. So you'll notice the Sujan and the Moang here are both in sort of like slightly compromised positions, and the Sujan especially can be caught out of cover. As Kerrigan moves forward, she'll see the Sujan first out of cover and then the Moang, and she's a good gunshot against both. Now, what's going to save me here is this saturation zone, the decompression zone, which means that she is reduced down to burst 2, which is basically a lot less reliable than burst 3. And in a moment of considerable mercy for myself and unfortunateness for my opponent, she moves forward, she sees the Sujan, she's 2 dice on 16s, I fire back with a Panzerfaust, 1 dice on 11s, she rolls a 1 and a 3, I roll a 10, and the Panzerfaust just cleans her up. Now, realistically, what probably should have happened is that after a few orders of shooting, I think she had a good chance of killing the Sujan. Its survival is quite lucky, but with her death, that's basically the last big gun that my opponent has gone. All that's left at this point is hacking. The Vostok is down and out again for the count. He could repair it, but doesn't particularly want to. The Puppet Bot is down, Nauf is down, there's not a lot left. So, however, there's plenty of orders in the tank, and so my opponent basically elects to resolve the situation in the Nomad way. So Pywell moves up, plots a pitcher down here, and the rest of the turn is basically just info war. And we get to experience what is probably the most Yuching versus Nomad moment imaginable, which is that we have a Sujan who is isolated and mobilized, but fully intact in a scoring zone. So it's bricked, it's a total mobility kill. I don't have an engineer in this list, I cannot recover it. I could try to roll a 1 on a reset, but it absorbed a lot of time and effort. My opponent also manages to spotlight the mowing. He's chosen to bring down the Sujan first, and I think that's very reasonable. With like 3 orders left, goes for a spotlight, fails, goes for a spotlight, succeeds, fires 1 missile, but I survive. So if we want a closer look at that, we can see that here. Mowing is alive, but it's targeted. The Sujan is totally bricked. At this point, though, by any reasonable metric, the game is mine to win. A great deal of damage has been done to my opponent, including in ARO, and I am sort of like comfortably positioned to ride the scenario out because I am the second player. This is Frontline, I need to get some classifieds done, but really I am just sort of like running down time to wait until scenario scoring becomes live. I actually consider on my second turn, I'm looking for a moment. So Bishia in the last turn, she just moved forward, right? She had 1 order basically spare to move up to here and go prone. I'm looking for an opportunity to make a big attack run with her, to do something flashy, but time is on my side. And so I do the sort of more conservative thing, and I basically just take care of my position and I attack with very disposable elements. So the Lagrotos is down, but I still have Shaolin Monk, singular. One of them got dropped in the first round. And most of this turn, you can actually see it in this photo, is a Shaolin Monk impetuousing forward. It'll pause to coup de grace a Puppet Bot somewhere in the midfield, maybe here, and then it runs up around this direction. Sorry, yeah, it takes this path. And this path will take it around behind Pywell, move into close combat, stab him in the back, and then move around here. There's like a couple of pistol shots. It might even down an Evo hacker with a pistol. It certainly kills the repeater on the way through with its pistol, the repeater that Pywell had laid, and then it just trades its chain rifle for Zoe. It's gotten targeted on the way. She's shooting on 14. She brings it down easily, but the chain rifle takes her out. And that's 2 kills this round. That's it. But they are significant, right? Taking down Pywell, taking down Zoe. This is shaving away the pieces that can do classifieds. It's shaving away the orders, shaving away the capability. Time is on my side. The remainder of the orders are spent basically making sure that the mowing does not get missiled to death. I think it takes me something like 3, it may even take 4 orders to clear targeted. Again, I have no engineer, it's a cost of this list, but it was important to do. So the mowing clears targeted and ends up on ground level in this space here. And then the Sujan uses its order to try and do follow-up. So my opponent's HVT is knocked in behind here, behind these big crates. It's in zone of control of the Sujan. I put the Sujan there for that reason. And while I have a massive penalty to resetting, I've got no such penalty to attempting to do follow-up. So the Sujan tries, it fails, but it will succeed the next turn. Now, I don't have a photo of the subsequent turn, but basically, at this point, my opponent has hemorrhaged out a whole lot of troopers. Really, all it has is a couple of cheerleaders. There's no really effective potential punch that can be made, and he needs to at least do some classifieds. So we basically have Billy sort of run forward up and around here. He's already done test run, and he manages to accomplish... no, not accomplish. He tries to, he's a repeater, he tries to allow for forward observe the HVT, so that is Zoe attempting spotlights, but she only has a couple of orders to do it. She needs to succeed twice, and she only succeeds once. However, Billy is securing the HVT, and that just plays into my final turn, where finally Bishia runs forward. She pops up onto here, runs forward, runs here, jumps up onto here. MSV1 multi-rifle shoots Billy in the back. I'm securing the HVT, I've done Extreme Prejudice, I've done follow-up with the Sujun, I do that this turn. Bishia does Net Undermine because she's a character, and then the Moang just runs forward into my opponent's zone. So at the end of this round, we've got Bishia and the Sujun along the middle line, easily scoring, Moang in my opponent's zone, easily scoring, and then just a bunch of Guangxi and stuff in my zone, and that wraps the game up. I'm scoring all 3 zones, and I've done all 4 classifieds once accounting for secure the HVT. So that's a 10-1 win for Yuqing. And honestly, a pretty clean defense. I think it was my choices, particularly in deployment, that really significantly helped this game. And just as a piece of general observation, I am finding more and more, this might just be a meta thing, but I'm increasingly willing to put heavy infantry with ostensibly active turn weapons on arrow duty if I have to. The Yanpo is a classic example, particularly if it's got a pocket doctor hanging out nearby, but things like the Azrael and Haqqislam, for example, I don't really like paying for dedicated ARO pieces, although I will sometimes as part of some lists. I've been playing with the Sundukbut, for example. But sometimes, just based on your opponent's offensive mix, you just have to stall them out. You just have to present something that will take them a couple of orders to either smoke past or force a guts roll and put into cover. And if what you've got are Armor 5 Heavy Infantry, then Armor 5 Heavy Infantry is what you use. Now, positioning them is critical, and I usually won't bother exposing them if I know that my opponent, or I suspect my opponent, has like a tag in reserve or a really big gun. But sometimes you can be sure that's not the case. This game was one of those situations. We had an event on the weekend where I got to play 2 rounds, and I had, for example, a game of Haqqislam versus Assassins, and you can bank on the fact that Assassins don't have a gun with good range beyond 24 inches. So I got thoroughly bailed out in that game by my Azrael standing on a tall building watching a significant portion of the battlefield. It pinned back a lot of my opponent's offense. So yeah, just kind of, it's interesting to see that pieces that I would not generally call ARO pieces can sometimes kind of be pushed into that position, pressed into service, to interesting effect. Surviving the first round is often it's the most important thing you can do when you're going second, and you really want to consider the resources you have to do that. So yeah, this was a pretty one-sided game. I'm happy with the choices that I made. Bit of a showcase of Yuqing, including Yuqing's vulnerabilities. We can still see that Sujun sitting there, isolated and immobilized in the midfield, but it is alive. It's lucky, but it's alive. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.